So one thing we talk about a lot is microlearning, and obviously that's a huge thing that we're about. So do you want to kind of explain what microlearning is?
Yeah, sure. So I think microlearning, the essence of it is really short and sharp learning. So under 10 minutes in length, ideally, although it could be a little bit longer, and focusing primarily on one key topic. So if you fit within those two things, then that's probably what we would call microlearning.
Okay, cool. And what's the benefit of kind of focusing on just one skill at a time?
So I think when you focus on just one thing at a time, it makes it a lot easier for the audience to, one, pick what they want to learn. Because with learning libraries being so big and vast, you often kind of can't find exactly the advice you need. So perhaps it's finding one specific part of a communication skill, or it might be running a meeting. They're quite specific topics. So when you've got a piece of learning that's 10 minutes on one thing, and it's got a nice single title for one topic, it makes it a lot easier to find exactly what you need.
Yeah, I think so. And I think probably the other thing that I would say around just focusing on one skill and one thing at a time is I think it just makes it easier to learn, because rather than kind of getting loads of information about lots of different things at once, like communication, I think that's a really good example, is that teaching somebody communication, there's so many different branches of communication that you could then go on to talk about.
Exactly.
And that can sometimes be quite confusing, whereas when it's very much one distinct focus, one outcome, teaching you one thing to really go in action, you're more likely to action it because you're actually going to remember it. And I think it just reduces that whole kind of cognitive overload really when you're actually mid flow of learning. It's not just like loads of information at once.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially, I mean, using the communication example, when you say, well, we're going to do a communication course, it's absolutely vast. You know, so many different areas. Maybe I've already focused a lot on communication in teams or communication to groups of people, but maybe I want to work on more building relationships, you know, as an individual or a one-on-one situation, asking for feedback, that type of thing. It's quite niche skills. So I think by focusing in on stuff, you're right, it just helps you pick exactly what you need.
Definitely.
Rather than having to focus on 40 minutes of stuff you don't want.
Yeah. So I guess that quite nicely leads us into kind of, well, I guess my next question is around the length. So you mentioned kind of 10 minutes in length primarily, hopefully kind of under. What's the positive of having learning that is that short? Because I mean, we have a lot of people saying to us like 10 minutes, what can you fit in 10 minutes? But actually, is there positives to that?
Well, I think the key benefit of it being nice and short is that, one, people don't really have to kind of book time in to learn. So with longer courses, they're having to put that in weeks in advance. You know, if you're spending a couple of hours, even an hour, people just don't have the time, or they say they don't have the time to learn. When something's 10 minutes, you can quite easily find a slot in your day to fit the learning in, which really helps. Yeah,
definitely. So I think that I guess comes to the flexibility element as well of microlearning, of kind of being able to learn on demand when you have maybe got a spare 10 minutes because a meeting's been cancelled, or, you know, potentially you're waiting for your next train or something.
Absolutely. And I think the key thing, and going back to what you mentioned about different topics, and it's, even if a topic is quite complex and quite big, it doesn't mean that you can't break it down into shorter 10-minute chunks. If you say, well, you've got to go on a full day communication course, that's quite a commitment, and it's almost like, well, hold on a minute, why don't we split those topics up into key kind of takeaways and then drip feed that over time? It doesn't have to be all in one go. And actually, when topics are quite interlinked, it actually helps that you're kind of reinforcing and rehearing the same kind of similar themes going across topics over time. So the actual retention rate of the learning is so much higher.
Yes, no, I completely agree. Okay, that sounds really interesting. So I guess just on that kind of, again, just coming back to that 10-minute kind of essence of microlearning, what about like engagement levels with microlearning because of that short element?
Well, I think that's one of the main benefits of short learning, is that the fact that people are actually going to be a lot more willing to do it. They're not going to then get bored halfway through and then think, you know, I've not got time to do this. One of the key things, I saw a really interesting stat on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, that the average amount of time before the average office worker is disrupted is about 11 minutes. So 11 minutes of solid work before some kind of distraction comes in and they end up changing or doing something different. Now, obviously, if you're keeping it under a 10-minute window, it helps to fit into that. So the likelihood of them actually completing the learning is so much higher. And it doesn't require so much kind of mental buy-in to complete a 10-minute session. The cadence is quite high, you feel motivated, and you're a lot less likely to start something and then leave it and not complete it.
Or I guess it's really similar vein is that you don't just start it and then you think, gosh, this is quite long, and then you start doing something in the background and then kind of half click through it. It is that cadence, isn't it? It's right, 10 minutes, I can get through this and focus and kind of get on with it.
Absolutely, and it just helps people to enjoy learning more.
Yes.
With short form content now being the predominant way that people are consuming content on social media, it's about making learning content that fits in with the material that they expect to engage with. So it's about trying to learn from popular social media type material and apply that to the learning world. Ultimately, if we can create a really great experience that feels like it's almost like social media, then you're onto a winner. People are going to be far more likely to engage with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's not only the initial engagement, but it's then the continued engagement over time as well. I think that's a huge part of it, is that the first one, if the first bit of learning was actually enjoyable and they actually kind of felt that they got something out of it because it was short and to the point, you can then kind of think, okay, that's going to be a continued engagement over time.
Absolutely. And the amount, it's just so much easier to buy into 10 minutes even if it was every day, 10 minutes every day. I mean, that's quite a lot, but even if it's 10 minutes a couple of times a week, so much easier to buy into that than to buy into one, say, 30 or 40 minute session a week. Finding the time to do that, especially when people are busy.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so we've taken microlearning, we've spoken about that kind of more generally. And now I guess if we kind of bring it back to 60, so kind of our approach to microlearning and how we take, on that, what would you kind of, have you got anything to say around that and how we maybe potentially do that a little bit differently?
Well, obviously it's fully micro-learning focused, so keeping things short and sharp and engaging, social media style. It's not all video, but we predominantly focus on video. But the key thing is that when we do use video, we then make sure that we're backing it up with text and buttons and quizzes and things like that, so that people aren't just kind of video and then switching off. It's about moving from video to text to quiz, back to video, and keeping things engaging and moving. Keeping each kind of piece of content under 60 seconds to make sure that people are learning something, then they're seeing it in a different way, they're backing it up, maybe they're testing their knowledge. And just they're scrolling, they're engaging with the learning rather than just kind of putting a 10-minute video on or a half an hour webinar and then kind of switching off using their phone in the background. It's about keeping that rhythm, keeping that excitement, and keeping the learning really short and bite-sized, so they're learning one thing thinking, right, that's really interesting, okay, I can hear it in a different way now, and then by the time you kind of finish that 10 minutes, it's kind of fully sunk in, the message is really embedded. Yeah,
no, I totally get you. And I think that what you said there around that kind of more of the social media style approach that we take, I think that links back to your earlier point around, really getting that consumer grade experience. So actually really feeling like this is a second nature platform where it just feels pretty much like TikTok, really.
Well, I think that's the other thing, is that a lot of e-learning is just not a pleasant experience. It just doesn't feel that engaging, that exciting, that smooth. You really want things to feel smooth and the design of the learning to be really, really high quality. And I think that's something that we've learned, is that if you want to get really high levels of buy-in on learning content, you've really got to make sure the experience is as good as kind of Netflix, YouTube Shorts, Instagram, and the feel of the product has to be as good as those apps.
I agree, like the UI and the design and that side of it. And I think that often you really focus on the learning, which obviously is really important, and the actual kind of content, but the actual experience and the user interface needs to be on par with that learning to actually really create that whole really positive experience. And I think probably the other thing that I was going to say on kind of the approach that kind of we take at 60, and the general approach with microlearning as well, to be honest, is that it's not just taking an existing 40-minute potentially bit of e-learning and just breaking it down into 10-minute chunks, because, you know, again, that's an often kind of common misconception, isn't it? So it's actually around really cutting the bump out of that.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different ways of doing it, and you're absolutely right. I mean, if there is a big topic, you might need to break it up into separate 10-minute chunks. But actually, the real challenge with microlearning is concision. It's about keeping things really short, and it's like that's often harder than, you know, it's actually a lot harder to create a 10-minute piece of learning that fits all the essential bits of information in than it is to deliver an hour-long session.
Yeah.
Because you're really having to be careful. Every word that you select is really important. You don't have a lot of time to get these across. You know, our videos, they're under 60 seconds. That's why we chose the name. It's really, really difficult to kind of focus on the key information. So, you know, we spend a lot of time choosing the right information to put in there, the information that people really, really need to know. And it's going to give them the best bang for their buck, because if people are going to learn, then you've got to give them the best material in their time. You've got to make it worth it for them.
Well, exactly.
And I think it's about, if you can generate really high value for people, that's when you get the buy-in for learning.
Yeah, definitely, and that kind of engagement, I completely agree. And the other thing that I was going to also kind of, we thought it'd be worth us kind of having a chat about is around kind of how we approach the actual kind of delivery to users and to learners at 60. So I guess microlearning, normally that's kind of hidden. It's almost like on a big kind of Netflix style kind of platform, and you kind of have to log in. You might get the odd, you know, bit of e-learning, the more traditional e-learning, saying, oh, an email, you've got this bit of e-learning outstanding, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to go and find my learning portal now, and then I'm gonna have to remember my password. Okay, reset password, and you've kind of got that whole side of it.
That was something that really amazed me in my last job, was that I was getting so many emails saying you need to complete this learning. Well, why don't they just send the learning?
I know.
It seemed so, it's just counterintuitive. If you really want people to engage with the learning, you have to make it really easy for them to consume the learning.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice on analytics and insight. You can still generate that through magic links and through other tools that we use, and that you can gain that insight. You don't have to have everything hosted in a LMS. It's just not the way that you need to do it nowadays.
And I think that comes back to just the society and the way that the landscape has changed now, is that everybody wants everything on demand at ease. You know, if they have to click an extra button, you lose people. It's like that kind of leaky bucket analogy. Every single click and every single extra interaction they have to give, more people drop off. And that's why it's important to basically just send, like you said, that learning direct to their inbox. So again, that's kind of why we use that magic link concept, is you receive the training, you click the link, and you're straight into engage. And I think it's that's a really big thing about just learning generally, that I think was a huge pet peeve for me.
Yeah, and absolutely. And with learning programs as well, it works. I really like that kind of leaky bucket idea. It's almost like, if you leave it too long between each kind of a learning event, especially, and this is really true of early careers, is it's often focused on a week when you first join the organisation, and then you might get another week 6 months later, another week 6 months later, but there isn't that much continuous learning between that. And if you think about all of that knowledge is then flowing out of the bucket in that period, you're not topping it up with anything. You're just kind of letting it almost dissipate completely, and then you're filling the bucket right up to the top with a week's learning again, and then you leave it 6 months and the bucket's completely empty again. You're not continuously adding little bits of extra learning, and I think that's the big mistake that people make, and it's terrible for repetition, for retention.
No, I can completely agree. And I think the thing with that is that I think the thing that organisations generally should be embedding in their employees is the idea of the continuous learning journey. And I think that that's something, again, when I was kind of more in the corporate world, it was very much exactly like you said, here's a load of learning and that's all you're getting. And I don't think I was ever really taught how important it is to make sure you're continually learning yourself.
Yeah.
And I think having that kind of learning spread out and almost, I guess, drip fed over a period of time really helps to ensure that.
Yeah, and it's not like that there's anything wrong with having a week's learning. It's fantastic to have live events and to get people together to network and do all of that thing. I think that's a key part of it. But I think it's almost like cramming for an exam. It's great in terms of the networking and the benefits of doing a live session are incredibly valuable to get people face to face and to practice these skills. But it is like cramming for an exam, and the long-term retention of those skills just isn't quite as high as when you are constantly reaffirming them over time.
Yeah.
And it just helps you maximise the benefit of those sessions as well.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. And I guess coming back to again, microlearning, where we kind of started this conversation around that really short, sharp.
Yeah.
I think a really big part of it as well for organisations is actually the return on investment piece, really, and the actual time employees have to actually spend out of the business consuming this kind of training.
Well, that's the other thing that with microlearning is the big cost difference. Now, you've got to think, okay, well, if I'm sending my employees off for an hour-long learning experience or even a week-long learning experience, that's a week that they're not adding value in terms of, creation of revenue and providing their function in their day job. Now, obviously, they come back and they've gained the benefits of learning, but if we can shorten that learning package down and give them the same level of knowledge and the same level of skills in a third, even a tenth, even more
of the time,
less of the time, then it's going to save organisations a lot of money.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think you think of that even just from an individual kind of perspective, don't you? But when you kind of multiply it, some organisations 5,000-10,000 employees, and this is potentially, it might be even compliance
it's
learning.
Significant.
It really, really does add up. And I think that's something that's kind of often forgotten. And I think that's why microlearning, it just seems to be the way that the world is moving. Not only is it going to actually help organisations save money, but equally, for the learner and for the employee, it's just an all-round better experience as well. So I think it's almost like a win-win on everybody's side, really.
Absolutely. And it's the way that generally content is going. It's short and sharper, short-form video, short-form reading content, podcasts. It all seems to be getting more kind of compact, more higher value, get to the point quickly. Attention spans are going down, and people are more time poor in general. They're working longer hours. People want to make sure that if they're going to spend their time learning, that it's going to give them real value, real impact. And I think that microlearning, being really concise, to the point, and focusing on the kind of the key points that give you maximum impact for the effort of applying it, that's going to be a winner.
100%, because we were having a look, weren't we, the other day around like some different social media platforms, and I mean, if you look at Instagram, they've released kind of their Reels feature. That was obviously a little while ago, but that's again all short form video. YouTube even have kind of created that YouTube Shorts element, haven't they, again taking those longer videos into the short ones. TikTok, that's inherently short and sharp, and also Snapchat, that's kind of short videos as well. So if you actually look at that kind of broader and more general landscape, it's the way that the consumer market is going, and I think it's just a matter of time until the learning landscape really does catch up in that respect. Microlearning, what subject.